Some people think the worst pain comes from being rejected. But sometimes, the deepest wound comes from being laughed at in front of everyone. What happened on one ordinary blind date changed several lives forever. It began with cruel jokes, embarrassed silence, and one young woman trying to hide her tears. It ended with a single act of kindness that nobody in that restaurant would ever forget. Before we begin, if stories about hope, compassion, and second chances touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Kindness Story, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories that remind the world kindness still exists. On a cool Friday evening in Chicago, Emily stood outside a small Italian restaurant, nervously checking her phone. She had never liked blind dates, but after months of encouragement from her best friend, she finally agreed to give one a chance. She wore a simple blue dress, comfortable shoes, and carried a gentle smile that always appeared when she felt nervous. Emily wasn't worried about looking perfect. She only hoped to meet someone kind. Inside the restaurant, a man named Ryan waited at a table near the window. He looked confident, wearing an expensive suit and constantly checking messages on his phone. Unknown to Emily, Ryan had invited two of his friends to sit nearby. They planned to secretly watch the date and laugh about it later. When Emily walked in, Ryan barely stood to greet her. "So, you're Emily?" he asked with a forced smile. She nodded warmly. "It's nice to finally meet you." For the first few minutes, the conversation was awkward but polite. Emily spoke about her job at the local children's library. She shared how much she loved reading stories to kids and helping families find books. Ryan didn't seem interested. Instead, he kept looking around the room. Then something happened that Emily never expected. Ryan's friends walked over pretending to be surprised. "Hey, Ryan," one of them shouted loudly. "Is this your blind date?" Several people turned to look. Ryan laughed. "Yeah," he answered. "My friends insisted I stay. They wanted to see if the dating app actually matched me with someone." The friends looked Emily up and down before exchanging smirks. One whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Guess the app needs glasses." A few uncomfortable laughs echoed through the restaurant. Emily felt her face turn red. She wanted to disappear. She quietly reached for her purse. "I think I'll leave," she said softly. Ryan shrugged. "Maybe that's for the best." Emily stood, trying to hold back tears. As she walked toward the door, the room felt painfully silent. She wasn't angry. She was simply heartbroken. Just before reaching the exit, an elderly waitress named Margaret gently touched her arm. "My dear," she said with a kind smile, "would you sit with me for just 1 minute?" Emily hesitated but agreed. Margaret led her to a quiet corner table and placed a warm cup of tea in front of her. "You didn't deserve that," Margaret said gently. Emily finally let the tears fall. "I keep wondering what's wrong with me." Margaret smiled sadly. "Nothing is wrong with you. Sometimes people confuse confidence with cruelty. Don't let their hearts convince you to doubt your own." Emily thanked her quietly. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened across the restaurant. A little girl about 8 years old walked up to Ryan's table. She had been eating dinner with her parents nearby. She looked directly at Ryan. "My mom says laughing at people doesn't make you important." The restaurant became completely quiet. The girl's father quickly stood, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he told Ryan. But Ryan couldn't even answer. The little girl wasn't finished. She pointed toward Emily. "That lady smiled at me when she came in. She looked nice. Why were you mean to her?" Nobody spoke. Ryan's friends suddenly found the floor very interesting. Margaret gently squeezed Emily's hand. "Come with me," she whispered. Together they walked back into the dining room. Margaret wasn't angry. She simply placed the restaurant's dessert menu in front of Emily. Then she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Tonight, dessert is free for the kindest guest in our restaurant." Everyone looked confused. Margaret smiled. "It isn't the richest guest." She looked at Ryan. "It isn't the funniest guest." She turned toward Emily. "It's the person who showed kindness, even after being treated with cruelty." The entire restaurant burst into applause. Emily stood frozen. She had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply remained respectful despite being humiliated. One elderly couple even stood to clap. Several customers smiled through tears. Ryan looked completely ashamed. For the first time that evening, he realized everyone had witnessed not Emily's embarrassment, but his own character. After several long moments, he slowly walked toward Emily. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me." Emily looked into his eyes. "You embarrassed me because you wanted your friends to laugh." Ryan lowered his head. "I know." She took a deep breath. "I forgive you." The room grew even quieter. Not because Ryan deserved forgiveness, but because Emily refused to let bitterness become part of her story. Margaret smiled proudly. "Kindness," she said softly, "is strongest when someone has every reason to choose anger instead." Weeks passed. Emily returned to the library where children continued running toward her with excitement every afternoon. Life slowly returned to normal. One Saturday, Margaret visited the library carrying a small package. Inside was a framed note. It read, "Never let someone else's lack of kindness change the goodness inside you." Emily hung the frame above the children's reading corner. Every child who visited asked about it. Instead of telling them about humiliation, she told them about hope. She explained that people will remember how you make them feel far longer than they'll remember what you looked like or what clothes you wore. Months later, Ryan volunteered at a local food pantry. Not because he wanted praise. Because one painful evening forced him to see the person he had become. He later wrote Emily a letter thanking her for forgiving him. He admitted that her grace changed him more than any punishment ever could. Emily smiled after reading it. She never answered the letter. She didn't need to. The greatest reply had already been given the night she chose kindness over revenge. Every person who had been inside that restaurant carried the memory with them. Some became more patient with strangers. Others apologized to people they had hurt. Parents shared the story with their children. One simple act of compassion quietly spread from one heart to another like ripples across still water. Kindness rarely makes headlines. It doesn't ask for applause. It often appears in small moments, a gentle word, an open seat, a warm smile, or the courage to forgive someone who never expected it. Yet those small moments can completely change a life. So wherever you are today, remember this. You may never know the battles someone else is fighting. Choose kindness when it's easy, and especially when it's hard. Your smallest act of compassion might become the moment another person remembers for the rest of their life. And perhaps, just like Emily's simple gesture, it will remind the world that kindness is still stronger than cruelty.